It's trying. It says we're live.
It says we're live.
There we go. We got
Aha.
the color change.
I will have to take it at its word.
All right.
So
Ian's stunt double, by the way, is Cedar today. Ian's on his way.
He'll be here eventually.
Yeah.
When he feels like it. In the meantime, to keep us all awake, let's drink some King Harv's coffee. The special North Texas Troublemakers blend is available, but he also has a number of other interesting
Yes.
varieties with stories to match. And I will be reading coffee stories, by the way, for those who submitted them to that anthology. To support the blanket fort and keep us cool because, dear God, it's an oven outside, you can donate to coffee.com at the blanket fort.
Hey, it's only 104 today.
It is only 104.
It cooled off.
It said in the little weather thing, feels like 113.
Hush.
Snarky. That's what we like. Snarky t-shirts. It can be found at Among the Leaves Tees.
Well, happy 4th to everybody.
Independence Day.
Yes, Independence Day.
Also Election Day in the UK, which should be interesting to see the fallout from that.
Well, especially after what happened in France last month.
Yes.
So.
Yes, I've been following this. Francis.
Yeah.
You know, Francis, I can't remember his last name. Suddenly my brain has gone blank. But his blog, now Substack, he's been doing a lot of articles on this, and it's been really interesting to read because I never paid much attention to the political situation in Britain other than it's confusing.
Yeah. Because the conservatives aren't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's been a thing to wrap my head around is in Europe, if it says they're right wing, it actually means they're what, the opposite of? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out to RK. She got up this morning and went and played for the parade.
Oh, wonderful.
Probably much cooler there.
She says 94 down there and 33% humidity with a nice breeze. That is not bad. And I know how far I have come when I can say it's not bad.
Nancy, shut up. Today will be 75.
We're supposed to have...
Yeah.
We're supposed to have weather blow in this evening, and tomorrow's high is predicted at 89.
Yeah.
It's going to feel positively chilly.
Yeah. One thing that I do want to talk about for a second. A lot of people seem to forget that the United States is a republic, not a democracy. If you remember, the Pledge of Allegiance says, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. A lot of people do not understand the difference between those two terms.
Yeah.
A republic is a representative form of government that rules according to the charter, constitution, charter or a constitution, and a democracy is a government that is ruled according to the will of the majority.
Right.
Yeah, I want to be the sheep in that one.
Bread and circuses. I mean, that was Rome's thing, which was the masses of people demanded food and entertainment, essentially. Yeah. I mean, bread and circuses, and the Roman leadership would give it to them because otherwise they would turn on them.
Yeah, exactly.
And because they had no representation. Mm-hmm. Those people had two options, which was either go along, get along, or rise up in a bloody revolt.
Yeah.
Whereas in theory, at least, as Jesse said a minute ago, a republic, if you can keep it, Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
In theory, and what we have is the ability to vote in or out the people that are doing things that we would rather they didn't do to our country.
Yeah. Bread and services to cake and TikTok. Yeah. That's a good point, sir. That's what we're trying to overcome is the democracy, quote unquote, of the left, the agenda and their desire to run us.
Yeah.
Um, we did this in 1776 for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it was successful in 1776 is we were armed. Um, Lexington Concord. The Brits thought they would walk in, take the cannon, go back to Boston, not have any problems. What they ran into was people that didn't think that way, had the weapons, had the capability, and most of all, had the guts to stand up to them.
The other thing too, and I don't know the history well enough to know this, whether the founding fathers chose this moment or if it just was serendipity, but Britain was fighting two wars.
Yeah.
So because their forces and ability to reach us were divided and diminished by having the entire dang Atlantic in the way.
Well, not only that, but the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
The taxes were the straw that broke the camel's back because
Yes.
Britain wanted Americans
To pay for the war in Europe.
pay for the war in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Gee, where have we seen that one before?
Right. And
Again,
that's,
still.
yeah, and taxation without representation was a pivotal part of the revolution. But the fact that we, as a nascent nation, really didn't have a huge amount of resources. Certainly not the nearly unlimited resources that the British Empire had comparatively.
Exactly.
Because we broke off at that time when they were trying to milk us dry to feed the other war.
Yeah.
They were divided and thus lessened so that we were able to shake off their regime.
Yeah, and as Dawn says, we had no representation in Parliament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the Republic thing of if, and as we go straight into politics, the whole thing with Chevron is that was without representation. Allowing an agency to set up laws is very literally exactly what we were fighting against.
An unelected.
Unelected, because it's
Agency.
not a representative agency.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Although I've seen some interesting analysis.
Yeah.
Some flat out ignorant ones, a lot of flat out ignorant emotional ones, but
Oh,
that
yeah.
goes back to the spread and circuses too, which is that people that don't look any further than the nose on their face, and
Speaking of circuses, now the DM's here.
and he's wearing an appropriate shirt for the day.
Got caffeine, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it does have caffeine. So, right, we had very little to lose.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of the founding fathers lost everything.
Yeah.
But the nation as itself was backed up against the wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, the blanket fort is clearly haunted. There is moaning. That's Nancy.
I have way too early in the morning and spent all day long trying not to fall asleep at my desk at the Raisin Farm.
And Differ's going, Kermit stole my coffee.
Oh no, Differs.
Oh, that's a shooting offense.
Will you only maim him lightly because you love him?
Well, Jesse, one of the things that we need to do is get back to people that actually are our equals in government, not our betters.
Mm-hmm.
They like to think they're our betters, but they just don't know.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. America, almost since the immediate aftermath of the revolution, and probably even before it, to be honest, because it's human nature, has had a thing for British aristocracy, or aristocracy in general. Look at how many American heiresses got shipped off to Britain and the colonies to marry aristocratic dudes that were penniless just because they had a title.
Well, there was a movement to make George Washington King George.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was going, oh, hell no.
So,
yeah.
So Americans have always had this thing for aristocracy. So what we have now is over the last couple of centuries, these elites that have lifted themselves up into the position of aristocracy as they see it, without taking along with them the nearly lost and dead concept of noblesse oblige.
Yeah.
So we have wannabe aristocrats who look at all of the mythology of terrible, awful feudal lords, not realizing that those feudal lords could only push that so far before the peasants were revolting.
Yeah.
And or the feudal lords around them put them down like the mad dog that they were.
And having seen aristocracy in action, no.
Having seen bad aristocrats getting put down like feral dogs before in Africa.
Yeah.
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 I'm thoroughly convinced if we were to take one out of every 10 Congress critters and one out of every 10 senators and make the other 9 tar and feather them.
Yeah.
That just to get their minds centered right.
I was thinking a different option, but that'll work
Kermit,
too.
give Differs her coffee back.
God, that sounds like a damn fine idea.
The term decimate did come to mind.
Yeah, but I'm thinking tar and feather not beating to death. That's like
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, and current day aristocracy, particularly in Britain, suffers from the fact that the best and the brightest of them died on the fields of World War One.
And two, yeah.
And two as well, but these were
mostly World War One.
the brave young men that wanted to set an example for those around them, and they went off and they fought and they died.
Noblesse oblige
Yes.
that you mentioned. They went because as aristocrats, that's basically what aristocrats did.
Yeah.
That's why we had aristocrats.
Yeah, that was their requirement.
The knights, they went off to fight because
So
that's what there was.
And they died under machine gun fire.
And the cowards stayed home and survived to propagate to the next generation.
Just like happened here.
Yeah.
With Vietnam.
Yeah.
The ones that ran to Canada
Mm-hmm.
didn't do shit but protest.
And then came crawling back in once it was safe for them too.
And got into the education system.
Because that was a way for them to run and hide.
Yep,
That was a
and
bold
took it
move.
over.
Yep.
Aristo, a la lanterne. Yep.
Well, and I'm trying to remember what I was reading recently, but it was a at the time written account of the French Revolution, and it was a rather horrified look at what the consequences of this was going to be, and the account was actually written before the revolutionaries in France turned on their own.
Yeah.
Which we see now, which is they eat their own. I mean,
I'm just laughing at Jesse's comment. You could center their minds in a basket if you use Dr. Guillotine's invention.
Well, I remember a vote in a certain African country, their government having a vote with the toes of the previous government dragging across the desk in front of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It tends to center the mind wonderfully, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
When the previous guys are hanging from the gallery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what I was reading. So I've been reading
Uh-huh.
Nigel Bigger's "What's Wrong with Rights," and it is, dear God, there's a reason I'm still reading, and I've been reading it for several weeks because the man dives deep into philosophy and law and goes basically back to the beginning to start defining what rights are and are not.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's very, very British. He's not entirely approving of the American experiment.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to. We threw his bunch out.
Yeah. Don found the answer. Hierarchy of the aristocracy has been set for thousands of years. Those who fight, those who pray, those who labor.
Yeah.
It's blurred a lot, but the bottom line is, to whom much is given, much is expected.
Right. And that's what's been lost.
Yeah.
Mostly, I mean, really what started it was World War One,
Yeah.
because that was such a bloody awful.
Well, not only it was the French, the English, the Germans,
Mm-hmm.
the Australians,
Belgians.
the Belgians.
Belgians lost an entire generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When this,
Five
this,
countries in
this-
Europe that lost.
This is very esoteric.
Yeah.
Probably most people don't know. Damascene steel barrels and shotguns.
Hmm.
We're used to these days don't fire proof loads in Damascene barrels.
Yeah.
Well, the Belgian gunsmiths were at the point of making light Damascene barrels for shotguns even stronger than the
Steel ones. Yeah.
They're even stronger than the standard.
Yeah.
But they all died on the field, and those Damascene barrels we could have had
Mhm.
lost.
Yeah. And we lost so much in those wars.
Because the Belgian gunsmiths were cannon fodder.
Hmm.
Well, Kermit, one thing you can do with tannerite, you can make it a flat plane so it goes up and down, doesn't come back at you. Just takes a little work.
Why is he asking?
Differs said that they had forgotten to get fireworks, so she wanted him to get out the tannerite, and he said no because the way he has his berm set up, he was afraid of shrapnel, which is very safety conscious and good. Yes.
Okay, go get some iodine crystals.
That might be harder to find than
Thank you.
that might be harder to find than fireworks.
You need some anhydrous ammonia and some iodine crystals.
Both of those might be harder to find than fireworks.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure there are fireworks tents still open.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
All right, potassium chloride. That's granulate. You're gonna
Hush.
use two tablespoons of sugar. What?
You're going to get our asses banned for
Kermit
sure.
says, Ian, we might actually have those.
I would not be surprised, quite honestly. But we do not need to be putting that formula out.
No.
It's not a formula. It's easy. It's
I know that. You know that. John Q. Public does not.
10-year-old kids can do it, for God's sake.
Yes, we used to.
And that is why the sound of freedom is just tinnitus. Jesse Barrett.
Michael Giesling. Oh my, now I'm remembering the explosive making in the book Farnham's Rio. Yes. H 4227 and 240 gram bullets instead. Yeah, that works too.
I miss. There was a store in the mall when I was a child in the 70s called Toys by Roy, and they had a chemistry section.
Yeah.
And I walked in there one time. My 14-year-old self looked up, and there was a jar of potassium chlorate.
Yeah.
Sitting right there, and the bastards wouldn't let me buy it.
Hell, I remember as a kid getting the chemistry set, the big metal one that
Mhm.
opened out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Ours
Oh, there was
wood.
some nice toys in
Ours
there.
was good wood. It
Yeah.
wasn't the pressed pine. It was good
Yeah.
wood. And when you open it up, it had fun stuff.
Oh, 1450 from 5.5 Red Hawk. Not too shabby.
Chlorates and permanganates and
Yeah, we had fun with that. Of course, today,
the very first experiment out of the manual
Yeah.
that this 8 and 10-year-old did, experiment number 1 ended with get a white 3x5 card, hold it behind a test tube, and the yellow fume was the chlorine gas.
yes. Yep. And it did remind us to do it outside.
Mine didn't. Chlorine gas will eat into a Persian rug, just to let you know.
You should have.
Oh, you're
Yeah, you got yours after I got mine.
Probably.
Mine had that comment in it,
one wonders if he paused to read the instruction manual.
or if
I
he
got-
read the entire
I got the
instruction.
chlorine. I mean, the chlorine gas came out. This was from Hamley's, and I don't know if anybody knows this. There was a toy shop in London called Hamley's,
Yeah, yeah.
and it was an entire city block. It was 4 stories tall
Cool.
of toys, and Hamley's was glorious. And the very top were the bigger kids' toys, where we got this chemistry
Mhm.
set.
Don says they didn't have a good chemistry set by the time she was 10.
No, Dawn, there. All the good stuff was long gone by then. Trust me. I mean, hell, mine had mercury in it.
Todd points out, there was a handy checklist in the back of mine. The never mix list.
I didn't have one. I had the manual was
Oh, yeah.
3/4 of an inch thick.
Yeah.
And the safest thing in there, was like they had a Bunsen alcohol burner.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the safest experiment in there that I did also on Mom's priceless Persian rug was you lit this little alcohol thing and you threw the iron filings through it so they burned.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you contrasted with a solid bar of iron.
Yeah.
And this was supposed to surface.
Yeah. So you set
Surface
the
area.
rug on fire again.
I did not set the rug on fire. I burned holes.
Yeah.
But it was to show, how surface area was important.
Yeah.
Surface area to mass was important.
Yeah. Yeah. Alan, hey, Vince, good to see you. We missed the fireworks. They had fireworks here Saturday night.
Yeah.
In June.
I missed.
And of course, we were out of town at that point.
I was
So
in lovely Chicago.
Yeah.
Well, not
Salt Lake City.
we will be doing burgers and dogs after the show today.
Assuming I can stay awake that long. I'm exhausted. I'm just flat knackered. I don't know.
Okay. Well,
Just
it's
flat knackered.
one of those days.
Yeah.
So
we all have them.
Sarah says, Ian didn't set the rug on fire. He got Chris to do it.
No. See, there was this also, if you take masking tape and you've made your powdered black powder, if you take the masking tape and you unroll a strip,
Yeah.
and sticky side up, and you sprinkle the black powder,
Yeah.
on the sticky side, then you roll it into a tube,
Yeah.
and
It's called a firecracker.
no, it's quick fuse, and it will burn a hole in a concrete slab that our driveway.
Well, if you're going to roll it that way, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
worked a treat.
Yeah.
And spectacularly.
Yes, books in the school libraries that included instructions for making fun stuff are a fond memory of some of us. I mean, I didn't go to that kind of school, but I did have some of my dad's field manuals.
I pilfered one of Dad's worn-out T-shirts
Mm-hmm.
from me and Chris, and we soaked it in a solution of nitric acid and sulfuric acid.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jesus.
Slash cotton, yes.
Oh,
And then we that was fun.
and it went up and with a quickness.
Poof.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was glorious.
Talking with a young lady on Facebook, or not Facebook, it was a Discord server, so a little bit less public. But she's, I don't know exactly what her degree is, if it's theater or film or some combination of, but they were trying to figure out how to have a safe fire explosion thing, so they could film something.
Define safe.
Yeah.
Well, right. That was part of the conversation.
Shit.
And I walked her through how to find information on making flash cotton and flash paper, because as a magician's wife, I used to make them.
Yeah.
They were part of setting up various props, and it was expensive to buy, so I learned how to make them.
First, go tactically acquire some
Yeah.
magnesium rims
Yeah.
and a file.
You can buy from magic supply stores everything you need to make it.
Yeah.
It's actually
Where's the fun in that?
Yeah. Dixie Gunworks used to sell black powder cannon fuse. Yeah. In the rolls.
Yeah.
50-foot rolls.
Yeah, and it was neutered.
I still like playing with dead cord. That just,
Dead cord's great. Dead
Yeah.
cord shock tube are great. It
well, they are until you do it to a steel door.
well, you're just not doing it right to a steel door.
No.
shrapnel.
No,
you're
not
doing it right.
shrapnel.
You're still
Just
not
the
doing
whole door went across the room.
Very large shrapnel.
No, it never came apart.
it. Thing
It
about,
just departed at a high rate of speed
I remember
and
this
went
very,
into the far wall.
very grizzled warrant officer that was said, does anybody know what the detonation velocity of detonation cord is? And I said between 22,500 feet per second and 26,000 feet per second, depending on humidity. You went, get your ass up here.
Yeah.
Fuck.
RK asks, that cord will take down a tree, won't it, Ian?
4 reps. No more than 4 reps. You go 4 reps, you're wasting dead cord.
Kermit points out
I know
that
people who know exactly how many wraps you
Kermit
Well, it
points
depends
out.
on the size of the tree too.
But yeah, I mean, Kermit says we get homeschool chemistry supply catalogs. NASCO. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We used to get the same ones.
And
I love those.
if you take the old, I don't know if the Army still has them, the old plastic targets on the fold down,
Yeah.
the fall down. They'll take one of those and some 90-mile-an-hour tape. You put 4 wraps around the target.
Yeah.
Around the edge of the target, and then you fill the middle with axle grease.
Yeah.
The axle grease makes it stick to a door, and then when the dead cord goes off, not only does it blow a hole in the door, but it also makes this lovely little fireball go across the room, which is really distracting to anybody inside.
Yeah.
Is that like because I know they had the sticky bombs, they call them, that they would stick to a tank in World
Yeah,
War II.
that was-
so same kind of thing.
David Sterling, no, that nutty Scot that was with him was
Oh,
taking plastic explosive,
Yeah.
and they couldn't get the explosive to ignite.
Yeah.
So he experimented with fuel oil and mixed magnesium powder or thermite and fuel oil into the plastique.
Yeah.
And finally got it to reliably ignite upon detonation.
also tends to make it a little sticky.
RK
was-
says David Neven has a hilarious story about his experience with sticky bombs.
Yeah. David Niven's another one that was there and done that stuff.
Ooh, Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is something that's kind of cool about our current crop of authors. I was thinking about this as I was watching the video of the Raconteur Press panel and watching a very excited Sergeant Major Burke, retired, bounce as he talked about the Pogue One
Yes.
anthology.
Yeah.
We have an awful lot of former and current military writing stories these days,
I hadn't noticed.
which for me harks back to some of my favorite authors: Alistair MacLean, Ian
Yeah.
Fleming,
Mhm.
Dick Francis. There's a bunch of really great authors of action adventure stuff, which is what I loved as an older teenager. My dad read them, and I picked them up from his stuff, and they had been there, done that. So what
Yeah.
they were writing was very much based in actual experiences.
Well, we got
Yeah.
a lot of authors that are veterans of the longest war in U.S. history.
Yeah.
The Global War on Terror has been a shooting war for 20 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the longest war, hot
Mhm.
war we've
Mhm.
ever been in.
Well,
And-
and they're telling my kid, his training class was the last one that was not on the accelerated wartime schedule. So all the training classes that came into the Navy after his were moving on a faster schedule, a shorter timeline, and they told him in like the last week of boot camp, because we were talking about it after his graduation, that they were moving the projection from 2027 back towards 2026.
Yeah.
So the military scuttlebutt is that there is war coming, and more than what we're doing now and soon.
There's always war coming.
Yeah, I know.
I hate to tell a lot of people this, but unfortunately, war is the default state of the human
Yes.
species.
Yes.
But
We've
No.
spent more time at peace in the last century than we really
Yeah.
had at any point before in history.
having grown up with a whole bunch of Vietnam, Oman, and Gulf War or Bush War vets,
Yeah.
I have to say our current crop of vets is a lot more stable.
Oh yeah. Well, I grew up with World War II vets. Yeah, definitely more
I had
stable.
a rotating crap ton of uncles that were straight from Vietnam or Oman or
Yeah.
Burma or the Bush War. And
My grandpa Ron, and he's the man that taught me woodscraft. He never really came home from Nam.
Yeah.
So
it's like,
That was not that unusual.
No.
my favorite Uncle Chuck, as Sarah Hoyt says, duct tape uncle. My dad was fond of saying, not all of Chuck came back from Vietnam.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that happened a lot because I mean, Grandpa Ron was probably my earliest exposure to it because I spent a lot of time with him starting at about age 6. But there's been a lot of guys that I met afterwards that were Vietnam vets, and for some reason would talk to me about things. And so I kind of got that look into that was a really I wound up studying the history of that war when it was not easy to find because there wasn't
Yeah.
it was very unpopular, so there wasn't a lot being
Yes.
written about it that was easy for me to get in touch with.
But I have to say
Well,
that
so-
we learned.
Yeah.
We did learn.
Yeah.
And RK makes a good point. Daddy was a sniper in the Philippines. He did not talk about it, but he sure taught his kids how to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of, I don't want to say projection, but there was a lot of stuff that I was taught by World War II vets that goes against what is taught in most gun schools.
Well,
And I mean, they made no bones about it. If you're going to pull a weapon, you're going to use the son of a bitch.
well,
And you kill the son of a bitch first and worry about it later.
I tell a story about mom losing her poo and dad going, eh. When they came home from a party, they'd been out somewhere for a party, came back, and Uncle Chuck was in the front yard teaching us how to silent sentry removal.
Yeah.
and the whys and wherefores.
Yeah.
And I got into one military school regarding that, and I told them what their teacher was bullshit.
Yeah.
And they said, why? And drawing back Uncle Chuck, it's like you're going to slice your own wrist if you do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
As referenced earlier, Christopher Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I was looking at it, and I mean, kind of an outsider's perspective, which was really driven home by going to the military graduation, and just watching all these kids. I mean, my grandfather served, my dad served, my husband did. I did not. I had intended to, and I spent an awful long time in the Civil Air Patrol. So I have some of the vocabulary and
Yeah.
even I've been told a few mannerisms.
That
Enough
you do.
enough years doing drill, I tend to walk like that. But it's not quite the same thing as having been there, done that. And I have hesitated to write military into
I gotta
stories.
have Mike give you a call.
No. Mike and I've already had this conversation. And he and I actually talked about it before he wrote the post about, yes, you can write military science fiction. And I have written military fiction in the past because I was compelled to. That's what the story demanded.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the
what
comment.
Don's being.
Yeah. I want to just take a second on PTSD.
Yeah.
Alma and I discussed this a couple of years ago, and we think that PTSD goes back at least to the 1400s, to the Crusaders.
Yeah.
There are written accounts of knights who fought battles in their sleep and woke up screaming.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. So
not only that,
yeah,
but how many of those out-of-body experiences that they experienced were PTSD?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, PTSD is not a new thing.
Oh, no,
No.
God, no.
And it's we can actually kind of see an origin point for where PTSD came in, because it used to be called a moral injury.
Yeah.
And that's some of it's that conflicted of, I have killed people and I have done bad things, and that's where the trauma starts to come in. If you aren't worried particularly about killing people and doing what another culture might consider a bad thing, then you're far less likely to have the trauma involved about it. Or you might have it differently. And someone just commented that Roman soldiers had PTSD, which, I mean, I'm sure that as long as men have been fighting other men, there's been different ways of reacting to this.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference between PTSD and PTS. And the D is really what pathologizes it, because if you have the disorder where you're no longer able to function in society, and I'm going to say specifically function in society, because there are people that have PTSD that are still functional, just not in society in the roles that are expected of them. But you can still have the post-traumatic stress that doesn't rise to the level of damage that PTSD can do. And the other thing is, and this is right from the fellow that defined it, Van der Kolk,
Yeah.
when the body keeps the score, which is that you will have physical manifestations of
Yep.
the trauma and the stress that get diagnosed as other things.
Yep.
So it's difficult to pin that down.
Yeah.
So
Suburban Banshee, that is why Alma and I were talking about specifically the 1400s, because that's where the first time that you really see the culture dealing with the warrior problems.
mhm.
And they were sending them to religious retreats,
Mhm.
and they were sleeping there and sitting around talking with other warriors.
Yeah.
And a lot of the first real documentation, so to speak, comes out of that.
Mhm.
The monks,
Yeah.
who were fantastic note takers,
Yes,
were
Yeah.
taking notes.
but yeah, it's existed since time immemorial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just we don't necessarily have the records, and like most of the rest of science, if you
Yeah.
don't write it down, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because we have so little records from a lot of cultures that it's difficult to piece together.
Mhm.
And
So-
other cultures didn't make observations. They made observations of what were important to them and
Mm-hmm.
less so for us.
I just finished reading a book called Six Societies, Robert Edgerton. It's written back in 1992, so it's not exactly a new book. But he was arguing against the anthropological trend towards the whole myth of noble savage, which has been around since ancient Greece, which I didn't realize. And also the modern trend that is the cultural relativist, the whole idea that we can't cast aspersions on what they do in their culture. But he goes into great detail in this book about some of the different things that cultures in different places do that are, by any Western perspective, horrible.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at some of them and thinking, I can probably figure out where that originated.
Mhm.
And some of it's probably dealing with traumas. It's and like catastrophic events that happened to whole people, and they developed rites and rituals
coping
to
mechanisms.
cope with that. So
Well, yeah, and the other thing, to go back to what Ian was saying, the way it gets recorded
hmm
is also based on the culture itself,
yes,
because Asian cultures, by and large, Chinese culture being another example, don't have the same consideration for human life we have.
Well,
yeah,
We don't have the same morals that Europeans
what's
have.
important to them is not necessarily what's important to us.
Right.
yeah.
And also, I have a strong aversion to referring to anthropology as a science.
Yeah.
I have strong aversion. Anthropology is an art.
Yeah.
hmm
And unfortunately, the trend in the last 20 years for anthropology is to soft pedal a racism, and it's inbred into the backbone of modern anthropological study.
which Edgerton actually gets into in the beginning of the book, and basically what he talks about is the fact that the anthropologist is not, and he can't really call themselves scientists any longer, and that the running gag, the running thing of anthropology is that any other culture is good as long as it's not a Western culture, because if it's a Western
That's that
culture,
soft
it's
racism-
bad. And-
soft
yeah,
racism
and
problem.
it's a self-loathing thing.
Yeah.
I was so pissed off. Overseas in Europe, archaeology is a completely separate field of study from anthropology.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
The thing about archaeologists is you get a shit ton of introverts
Mhm.
because they get to go into nice, quiet places with a bunch of dead people.
Yeah.
and nobody's bothering them because, well, dead people don't bother you, and
Yeah.
people don't go where dead people are. Well, here in the States in the 60s, all these introverted archaeologists, the anthropologists, who are the extreme exact opposite, because they have to like people. You're studying people, you gotta like them, right?
Yeah.
They're extroverts. Whee!
Yeah.
They glommed onto archaeology and sucked it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're ruining archaeology in the States.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the thing about, oh, well, you can't tell a male skeleton from a female skeleton.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Well, my big one, and the one
And then you can't report it if you do.
I got to scream at the TV set back while when we still had a TV set. There was this great huge revelation that there were Scandinavian or Viking warrior women.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that the single and sole point
Yeah.
was
One.
they had found the grave of a woman that had a sword in it.
Yeah.
And I'm yelling, and I said, "Well, this is obviously means she was a warrior." And I said, "No, it's obviously that they buried her with a sword.
Yeah.
You need to have more data."
Yeah.
But they went ahead and extrapolated exactly what they wanted to get out of it
Oh yeah.
with absolutely zero supporting evidence.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a woman in a grave with a sword. That does not mean
Yeah.
necessarily. It doesn't not mean, but it doesn't mean. It's like if you were to dig up 300 Victorian female graves,
Yeah.
you would swear that every woman in the Victorian ages was buried as soon as she got married because they're all in their wedding gowns.
Yeah. Well, and it could have been a grave gift too. Who knows?
It might have been her dead husband's
Yeah.
sword.
I like Robert Cruz made a comment. Said dead people normally don't bother you. No, it's just when you get the tap on the shoulder.
It's nice and peaceful. They're
Yeah.
quiet. They make good neighbors.
Yeah.
Oh.
They don't bother me. They don't ask for cups of coffee at 3 a.m. I'm quite happy.
I only did that once.
But the whole thing with the self-loathing actually ties back into the death of the aristocracy in World War One.
Yeah.
And that was also when you start to see the Western culture turn in on itself. And it's almost like as a society, we had PTSD.
I
and,
love
and that's where because then you start to see things like
I
Marx and Engels and
yes,
that ilk really
Yeah.
spring up.
the ilk of basement dwelling neckbeards.
Yeah.
I loved reading the Victorian stuff. Other than the outright and quite proud racism, which you can't judge for the time,
Right.
but they were very much, we are the pinnacle of the human race and let's go do things,
Yeah.
which was great.
Yeah.
Let's bring religion to the fuzzy wuzzies.
I read
Still trying to do that, and it's still not working.
Mhm.
Bugger the
I
fuzzy
read a
wuzzies.
lot of mythology and folklore and stuff as research for what I write because I started out early on using a lot of that in my storytelling, which is actually why I read some anthropology, but I'm really careful about how old the books are. They've got to be old enough.
Yeah.
But if you look at these myths and legends and stuff there were Victorians that went out and collected everything.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for their obsessive little hearts, they went out and collected all of these stories.
Yeah.
And it's like I was trying to find stories of Siberian folktale because I had a story I was setting in Siberia. And the Russians just went in and wiped them all out.
Mhm.
All the tribes. There were about 13 tribes that inhabited various parts. And they just wiped them out. And what's left of them have no language, almost no stories, almost no traditions, because nobody bothered with records because
Why?
why?
They
They
were
were just going to
savages.
wipe them out
They were-
and
they were
take
savages.
the furs and the minerals and stuff that they wanted out of those
Yeah.
regions. The British didn't, for all of the British did things wrong from time to time, well, a lot of times.
Well,
They
only-
also did a lot of things right.
the only reason Egyptology is a science or a field of study
Yeah.
is because a whole bunch of curious, possessive Brits
Yeah.
showed up in Egypt and went, all right, we'll take this.
Yeah.
Because trust me, I've been to other, Egypt has this rich cultural history that the Victorian Brits saved.
Yeah.
Because a lot of other places have rich history. Victorians didn't get there,
Yeah.
and it's gone.
Yeah. Well, there
Well,
were
and
some,
look at what happened in Iraq.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was
Yeah.
going to talk about.
And then
Not
you got
only
religious
Iraq.
zealots destroying statues in downtown Portland.
Yeah.
So,
Not only Iraq, but even before that, there were some absolutely amazing. I've seen sketchings and drawings of these Buddhist temples and statues
The
out
Buddhas
in
of Bamiyan.
out in the raving wilderness
Angkor
in
Wat.
Afghanistan.
Angkor Wat, but also Afghanistan,
Yeah.
and
Bamiyan.
up in that area, there were just these absolutely amazing, massive things, and they got blown up with dynamite
Mhm.
because a certain religion doesn't do graven images.
After I know the great thing about, well, not great thing, the squirrely thing about the Buddhas of Bamiyan, I think it's Bamiyan, was the Taliban did, let's face it, it's fucking Taliban.
Yeah.
They did initial damage. And the UN went, oh my God. And the Taliban high goat snugglers said, oh, you're right, we won't. And the local guy said, fuck that, and blew them
Yeah.
up anyway.
Yeah.
I want to take a digression here.
Yes.
Suburban Banshees said Peter Jackson's World War I documentary points out most World War I UK vets were happy about the war and had a good time, and they remembered it fondly. Albeit some guys had a really bad time and they were dead. Suburban Banshee, I hate to say this, but that is bullshit.
Yeah, that does not jive with a lot of the fiction that I've
No.
read that was written at that time by people coping with that.
It's also people remembering the good times to forget the bad times.
I mean, okay,
You do not watch your best friends die on either side of you and think it's a good time.
remembering that World War I, the Brits had, I forget what they were called, but they would have an entire small town
Mm-hmm.
in one unit.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Villages.
yeah, villages
Yeah.
in one unit.
Right.
They'd be all called, they'd be trained together,
Mm-hmm.
deployed together,
Yep.
and massacred together.
Yep.
It was not. Remember that Tolkien talked about some of that.
Yeah.
When he would talk, he did not remember the war fondly.
No.
No.
And
That-
there's a reason that Tolkien wrote about
Sweeping, glorious.
the scouring of the Shire. What
Oh, yeah.
happened to the Shire was because of that. I've had people tell me it was the Industrial Revolution, and I'm like, no, it was the aftermath of what happened to villages
What
in World War One
Saruman did,
in both France and England.
what Saruman did with outside of Fangorn was the Industrial Revolution. Part.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
scouring of the Shire was very definitely.
Yeah.
Pals battalions, that's what they were called.
Pals
Pals
Battalion.
battalions, yeah.
Yeah, it was. There's a number of books that I've read. Probably the most famous ones that deal with this are the Dorothy Sayers mysteries, and Peter Wimsey, her detective, is and also a member of the aristocracy,
Yeah.
and very much conscious of his noblesse oblige and his struggles with having survived the war, because
Mhm.
honestly he felt that there were men that
Survivor
died
guilt
that
was
were
a thing.
better than he,
Yeah.
and that he should have done. That was actually one of his big struggles, was the survival guilt.
Yeah.
But also Eileen Gouge's books talk about, and they were written in the immediate aftermath, in that section between, there's a very strange period of time there in literary fiction between World War I, before World War II, and going back and reading it now, because it was just being written as these stories are set in this time. They weren't reading them as history, but now when I go back and I read that, and I get this window into that period of time between the two wars, because after World War II, the rationing was kept on going in Britain for a lot longer than it needed to be. It
Yeah.
didn't end until like the Korean War era, which I didn't realize as a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't until I was an
Another
adult
10 years
that I realized
yeah.
that they were near starving for a decade, and what that will do to the development of children.
Well, the other thing you talked about, the Pals battalions, the U.S. did something similar there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And Bedford, Virginia paid the price. I want to say that 90+% of the people that enlisted from Bedford, Virginia died in World War II
Yeah.
because they went in together, they trained together, they fought together, they died together. Yeah, yeah, rationing was still happening in the 80s for certain goods in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't remember the name of the book now, but it's one of Nigel Shute's books. Dave Freer got me into reading some of his stuff, and it opens basically with an elderly lady starving to death in Britain because she didn't have access to enough food to keep herself
Yeah.
alive. But I know, I mean, you're talking about child development, and just very simply, without sufficient fats, the brain does not develop properly. So that cripples a nation's progress from there out, too.
Yeah.
And we see the knock-on effects into the Great Britain of today is not what the Great Britain was
None of the countries over there are.
No. Well, for me specifically, it's because I've read a lot of British literature from a certain era. And then I look at modern Britain and I'm like, what happened? And I mean, I know what happened, but it's kind of.
Yeah. Between the malnutrition and that applies to a number of countries in Europe.
And elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the malnutrition and the opening of borders and the number of illegals that have come into all those countries.
Yeah.
You know, it's no wonder they're in the situation they are today.
It's a death of a culture.
Yeah.
One of the things that we learned in police academy was when you have homogenous culture, you have low crime.
Yeah. It's
when you start mixing cultures, that friction areas where two cultures blah 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 against each other.
Yeah.
It's where the crimes occur. That's why port cities are so bad.
Yeah.
Port cities have a very justifiable reputation for being high crime areas.
Oh God, Marseille, France.
One of my favorite cities in the world, which says a great deal about me, none of which are good. And when you have a homogenous culture, everybody shares the same values, same religion, more or less. You have crime, but not a high crime rate.
Right.
And then you started mixing non-homogenous cultures, and things go squiffy with quickness.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing in Naples.
Suburban Banshee points out, she says the Danish famine studies showed that the kid of someone who's a kid in a famine will still have some bad effects. Yep. Yes, that's epigenetics.
Yeah.
And indeed it is stuff in genes gets turned on and it doesn't turn off again. They think it takes about 3 generations to eliminate the after effects of that. But epigenetics is fascinating because we do have things that can get toggled on and off in our genetic makeup, and it is heritable. At one point, the theory of evolution did not allow for that. Lamarck was discredited in favor of Darwin and Darwin's theory of adaptation and evolution. And then the reality is actually somewhere in between and fascinating.
One of the interesting things about epigenetics, now you bring it up, is one of the things that can be toggled on is increased aggression in males.
Yes.
Which has an extremely interesting effect on society.
Well, it does. And here's the thing, which is if young males don't have any outlet for that aggression, that is like exploration of a frontier, which is a great outlet for that pent-up energy and aggression, that's when you start to have your gang wars and your revolts.
And it's also self-selecting.
Your sons of fathers who have been under sustained ongoing violence have an increased level of violence, even if the father isn't there.
Yeah.
We're seeing this in the inner cities.
Yeah.
Is where the sons of extremely violent over long-term men who get the mother pregnant and they disappear and never be seen again. The boys still show the marked aggression with aggression markers.
And that they show that at a young age, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And again, it's about, I think they're thinking about 3 generations before that gene switches off.
Yeah. So Rob Henderson's book Troubled, he's was a product of the foster system and had a really troubled upbringing, but still better than, and he points this out, still better than some of his cohort.
Mhm.
But he talks about the fact that he managed to pull himself up out of that, use the military as a way to go to college.
Yeah.
Got to college, looked around and realized that he was used to in a small, I think it was California or Oregon town, vaguely rural. Most of his friends and people that he knew were single parent households, but all the people in the ritzy college that he was going to, the vast majority of them were 2-parent households. And so his thesis is that in our society, the fact that you have an intact nuclear family is an indicator of how well you will succeed.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
one of the things that annoys me about current trends is destroying a system without understanding why the system's come about.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
the nuclear family,
Chesterton's fence.
the nuclear family has been the center point, the center of a bunch of societies.
It has been under attack
Yeah.
for a long time.
Somebody over there
Are
in the
you
corner
okay,
giggling.
Jonna?
Jonah's giggling.
But-
I'm going to change you out. He just gave me a description of beating me the first time. I'll tell you
But
later.
Oh,
in
God.
Western cultures,
Yeah.
the nuclear father, mother, children,
Hmm.
and despite the common misconception in Arab families, it's all one man, 4 wives. No, that's for most Muslim families, it's husband, wife, children.
Yeah.
In African husband, wife, children.
But it's
That
expensive to have multiple wives. So you really only have that at your like high on leadership levels.
Yeah.
So the husband, wife, children model survives throughout the world, and for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Why are we destroying it? We've got a system that has been adapted over 1,000 years and apparently works, and these folks are destroying it, not trying to understand why we have it.
So, and here's the
Well,
hilarious
they
thing.
want to destroy it because that gives them power.
Hmm. But here's the funny thing, which is that the book I was referenced earlier, Six Societies, is talking about the myth of primitive cultures being better cultures. Well, the primitive cultures are the husband, wife, children kind of thing.
Yeah.
Originates back towards that, but they want to destroy that because now they feel like our culture has moved beyond that. We have. I don't
I've
know.
lived in primitive cultures. They ain't all that.
No,
entire
well,
crust.
that's Six Societies. That's its entire point of.
Right, been in
All right.
States.
So-
Thank you.
I want to go back. Richard found the answer for me. Thank you,
Uh-oh.
Richard. Bedford, Virginia, Company A, 1st Battalion, 116th Infantry, 29th Infantry Division of the National Guard. 38 males in the unit, 20 died on D-Day.
Yeah,
That's why the National
that leaves
World
a
War
mark.
II D-Day Museum is in Bedford.
Mm-hmm.
And Dawn says, it's expensive, and if your first wife doesn't want you to have another wife, she has ways of making life difficult for you.
That's women in general.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's different about that? Let's get off of that and get on to the good stuff.
Yeah.
Minefield.
We have-
Minefield.
We have good stuff. We have Maggie Noir.
Yeah.
You know I was out. Oh, I gotta check and see if we've gotten.
I don't know if we have rankings yet, but Maggie Noir came out this morning,
Yeah.
both paperback and ebook.
This is the first one I've been obsessing over.
The first one you've been obsessing
In a
over.
while.
Is that what you're saying?
In a while. There for a while, it's like, we had one come out. This one, it's like I'm every 50
He wants
minutes.
to
I'm
know.
checking.
So, no, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I read the stories so that I can do the illustrations in the
Yeah.
book, and Rita really outdid herself in selecting some just fun stuff and a nice variety. I
Yeah.
mean, Maggie Noir, you think, okay, cats and noir, that's
Yeah.
kind of tight, but
No rankings yet.
there's some fun stuff in that
Amazon
book.
needs to get
So,
off the stick.
I was just thinking black cats, but that's
Amazon needs to get
well,
off
a
the
lot of
stick.
people were thinking black cats.
yeah.
But it's still there's a lot of room to play, and
Yeah.
our authors
Yep.
did play.
And of course, your cover
Oh, yeah, well,
is a
that's
black cat.
that's Rita. I mean,
Like, really?
2 years in, and we launch a new one. It's like, oh, I should probably put up something, and then okay, but this one I've been every 15 minutes check to see the
Yeah.
rankings yet. Haven't done that since Lotto Files.
yes, you do have to get together your Super Generation story.
Yes,
Who's
Dawn.
So Dawn is writing a Super Generation story. That one's going to be another fun one. I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to
heck.
seeing what y'all send in for that.
A heck of a lot of fun.
Dipper
So-
says, I want a sister wife. Somebody do the laundry and the dishes.
So yes, in Amazon's advanced search, you can search by publisher. However, because all of the Raconteur Press anthologies are listed under the series Raconteur Anthologies, if you search for that, it'll pop right up.
And you get all 31
Yep.
of them.
31 books at this point. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
AJ, that's a good point. You can't replace the culture until you destroy the stability.
yeah,
Well, to those that are trying to destroy our stability, fuck them.
Independence Day. We are independent,
We tend to be,
vehemently so.
Yeah,
Americans tend to be viciously independent.
yes, for a
Sometimes,
reason.
sometimes almost too independent.
Viciously independent.
Oh.
Dawn wants a cabana boy. Why am I not surprised?
On that note,
Yeah. You folks enjoy your 4th. Thank you for sticking with us today. We only got 12 likes. Jeez.
How many are watching?
well, we
38.
did kind of go with some dark
Yeah.
topics. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. That pesky science tends to rear its head around here on a regular basis.
It's that little
Also-
soapbox on little legs, and all of a sudden it's under me.
Apparently, the Stasi at YouTube refused to let me talk about, iodine crystals and anhydrous.
Stop it. Oh, folks, have a good one. Be safe if you're playing with fireworks tonight. Happy 4th of
or
July.
making your own. Be safe if you're making your own fireworks.
Blow holes in the darkness, people.
Yes.
Blow holes in the darkness.
Ah,
Well, those level 4 plates.
yeah. And remember, don't sweat the petty stuff. Don't pet the sweaty stuff.
We're too darn sweaty. Never mind.
All right.
Everybody's
Bye.
sweaty right now.